Hey everybody, my name is Jay. I'm the head instructor from Broadsword Academy Manitoba, and we study the art of Highland broadsword. All right, so the first thing that I wanted to start with today was gripping the weapon. It's important that you build your base kind of from the ground up, but the fundamentals are super important. The weapon, I'm using a spadroon here with less of a guard so you can actually see my fingers. However, most of the time we're using a fully enclosed hilt, so I wouldn't be able to demonstrate that. But the basic idea is that the sword is gripped fairly loosely in my hand, and I use a lot of motion of the fingers, okay? So when I disengage from my opponent's blade, I'll tilt back with the wrist and then snap it forward with the fingers to add a little bit of extra strength and mobility. And I'm doing that from all sorts of different angles. I'm using the fingers kind of constantly and changing, loosening them, tightening them to kind of aid the blade as it moves around and give me absolute freedom and mobility. So the next thing that I want to show you is the basic stance. Now if we start in first position here, if I'm a right-handed opponent, I'm going to get my lead toe to face towards my opponent directly, and my rear foot is going to face off, okay? This isn't my basic on-guard stance, so what I'm going to do to get into that, it's called second position, is I'm going to step 1.5 to 2 feet ahead of my rear foot. So that's going to look like this, 1.5 or maybe 2 feet. So now the weight is still resting on the rear leg. What I'm going to do is sink my knees and bend them down. My toe is still pointing towards my opponent, and my body is going to be nice and upright, straight back, and if I want to, I can place my rear hand over my hip, just like this, and this is our basic on-guard stance. Now the reason why we have our weight over onto the rear leg is so that if my opponent attacks at my leg, I can just slip it back into first position so they miss the attack, okay? So I always need to be ready because the full body is a target. I always need to be ready to defend myself. And then from there, we're going to go into the next position, which is called third position. This is a lunge. This is what I do when I attack the opponent. So what I'm going to do is push off the rear leg and kick up this lead leg, and I end up in a nice lunge position with my torso still nice and upright, my rear legs straight, and my rear foot planted on the ground. Okay, so there we have first, second, and third position. And I'll just demonstrate that. So first, second, and third position. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to show you guys is how to move around. That's really important. In Highland Broadsword, we're moving around 360 degrees. So to advance on my opponent, to move forward, if I need to get closer, what I'm going to do is start with the lead leg. I'm just going to go into a nice pipe stem position, or you can just let the foot hover over the ground. But I'm just going to advance that. If I'm going forward, my lead leg goes first, my rear leg catches up. Now if I go backwards, I start with my rear leg, and then my lead leg catches up. So I'm always in this nice balanced on-guard position, whether I'm moving forward or backwards, right? Any direction I go. The same principle applies if I move to the left. I'm going to start with my left leg, so I end up in a wide stance, and then my right leg catches up. So the whole time I'm grounded, right? So I start again, left leg, right leg follows. If I want to go the other way, I start with the right leg. If I want to go to the right, I start with the right. That way my legs never cross over each other. I'm never in an awkward position. I'm always in my stance. So if we just practice that together, what we can do is advance, retreat, move left, and move right. Again, advance, retreat, move left, and move right. Now if we want to add a little bit more to that, what we can do is practice passing forward. So passing is when you cross one leg in front of the other or behind. So what I'm going to do is pass forward. My rear leg now takes the position of my front leg, and then the right leg catches up, and then pass back. Pass forward and pass back. And the whole time I want to have a nice balanced position where I'm not bobbing up and down. So let's put that all together. What we're going to do is advance, retreat, move left, move right, pass forward, and pass back. So that's some of the basic footwork of Highland Broadsword. So the next thing that we need to learn is guard positions. The basic principle of a guard is that it's a position that defends you from your opponent. So what I try to do is limit my opponent's options so I can predict where they're going to strike me. The first one we're going to learn is called the outside guard. Now the outside is the right side of my face, the right side of my body. That's called the outside. The inside is when I'm facing my opponent, right foot forward, it would be my left cheek, my stomach, my chest, and the whole left side of my body. So what I'm going to do in this position is raise my sword to about hip level, and I'm going to turn my nails facing down. I'm going to be in a nice on guard position, second position. And so the true edge, this is the true edge, this is the false edge. The true edge is always turned to face my opponent's blade. So nails down, the point of my sword should be about level with my opponent's right eye. So from this position, if Wyatt tries to attack me on this side, I'm defended. He can't. He needs to disengage and go around my sword to attack me on the inside. In which case I will form an inside guard. If my opponent is on the inside of my blade, I'm in the same position, except I'm going to turn my nails upwards. And now the point of my sword should be level with Wyatt's left eye. The hilt of the sword is still about hip level. And this defends me. The true edge is facing my opponent's sword. This defends me on the inside. And now if he tries to attack me on the inside, he can't. He'll have to go around to the outside, in which case I'll go to the outside guard, okay? So by doing this, you limit your opponent's options. But there's a third guard we're going to go over, and in fact there are a few other ones, but this third guard we're going to go over is a very defensive guard. So the problem with these guards, the outside and the inside, is that I'm not only exposed on the opposite side, so this is an outside guard, I'm not only exposed on the inside, but I'm also exposed to the top of the head. The hanging guard solves this problem by raising the hilt, dropping the point of my sword, and now if you look, my head is defended, and I'm also defended on the outside. From this guard, I can defend anywhere on my body. If he attacks the top of my head, I have only to raise the sword. If he attacks the inside, just move it a little to the inside. If he cuts me to the body, the same thing. The basic principle here, though, is using leverage against my opponent. So for example, if I try to parry my opponent's sword with the weak part of my blade, this is called the weak, what's going to happen is he's going to go right through that. So I want to parry as close to the hand as possible, and this is called the strong. We can divide the sword into three parts: the strong, the middle, and the weak. And this is just for leverage, right? I parry with the strong, I cut with the weak, because once this is in motion, that's the most powerful part of the blade. So in Highland broadsword fencing, there are traditionally 7 or 8, sometimes even 6, a little lower number of cuts. And cuts are using the edge of the blade to attack the opponent. A point or a thrust is using the tip of your blade to kind of stab at them. So there are 7 different angles that we use, sometimes 8. I'm going to show them to you. The first one, if I start in my outside guard, the first one I'm doing is from the right side down to the bottom to the left. So this is called a cut number 1. And if I just rotate my blade, I can come back and make a cut number 2. Now that's from the left side down to the right. So if I string those 2 cuts together, I get something called a figure 8, which is a nice little exercise that I can do by turning the blade. You can see those 2 different angles of attack there, cut number 1 and cut number 2. When I'm doing this, I should mostly be using my wrist. My shoulder moves a little bit to close the line to defend me, but if I use a smaller joint such as the wrist, it leaves my basket out in front of me, versus if I use my shoulder, you can see I'm completely exposed here after making my cut. So if I leave my sword nice in front of me, I'm defended the entire time. Those are descending cuts. Rising cuts are also very effective for attacking the person under their arm, maybe to the leg or a lower target. And what they do is they rise up from a lower position. So this one is cut number 3. It rises from the right side up to the left. And it can turn into cut number 4, which goes from the left up to the right. So far we have cuts number 1, 2, 3, and 4. 5 and 6 are horizontal cuts, and these can be used to target different parts of the body, from the head, the neck, the breast, the waist, or even down to the leg. The basic idea is I'm cutting my opponent straight across. That could be almost like a decapitating strike. That's a cut number 5, and it comes back across to become a cut number 6. And you notice I'm using a little bit more of my shoulder in those cuts to close the line more effectively. Cut number 5 and cut number 6. Finally, there's a cut number 7, which goes directly down from the top down to the bottom. Cut number 7, okay? Just a straight cut downwards. And if you feel like adding it, you can do a cut with a false edge called an 8 that goes back up. But typically we don't do those, as they tend to attack a target that isn't a good place to get hit. So we're going to go over the 7 cuts now. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, I'll do it a little bit faster, and you'll notice that I have to use my fingers to guide the sword. And 1, All of my attacks, I need to do so in a safe way. I'm not just trying to hit my opponent first, but I'm trying not to get hit at all. So the first way of doing this when I'm cutting is with something called opposition. Now that's where I try to control my opponent's sword as I attack them. So if Wyatt and I say are engaged in an outside guard and I want to make a cut number 1 at Wyatt's head, what I need to do is disengage around and actually grab his sword with the strong part of mine, getting leverage on his blade, and then cut 1 home. And as you can see, I've completely controlled his blade. If he tries to attack me, he's really stuck, and I can hit him safely and then recover and get at a distance. Okay? So I'm doing this attack on a lunge. Again, disengage, cut, recover. The key here is as I disengage, I want to do that with the tilt of a wrist, snapping forward with the fingers. If I make too big of a motion, he's going to be able to hit me on the hand or the face as I do it. So I have to make it as small and controlled as possible. And I disengage around, hit him in the face, and recover. The same thing is true of cut number 2. If I want to strike Wyatt in the face, what I can do is disengage around his sword, cut number 2 at his face, and now I've controlled it to the other side. And that's why the motion of the shoulders is very important, because it'll push his sword off to one side or the other, and I can attack him in a safe way. So that's great. It would be perfect if I could hit my opponent like that every time, but there's a defense to it, just like there's a defense to everything in fencing. So the basic defense is if Wyatt attacks me, I'm going to defend myself by parrying. He's going to cut at my face, I'm going to parry his sword. And I've successfully defended myself, but I'm not going to leave it there. His sword is stopped, he's in a vulnerable position, and what I can do is do a riposte, which means an answer, and strike him on the face in answer to his attack. So he attacks me at the face, I parry, and then riposte. Again. And I can show that from the other side. That was from the outside to the inside. Now we're going to do that from the inside to the outside. A parry and a riposte. Parry and a riposte. Awesome. So now we understand some of the basic attacks and defenses. But defenses don't answer everything. There's a way to get around them. And you do that with a feint, which is a deception or a false action. So if I know my opponent has a tendency to parry, what I can do is make him think I'm attacking him here. As he commits to the parry, I attack him somewhere else. And the basic idea is that just like the first cut we learned with opposition, it provides me with safety because he can't hit me if he's moving his sword in another direction. Okay, so what we're going to do is start on the outside guard here, and I'm going to make a feint, which is a small motion. It's not very big. You don't have to make a big motion because then you won't be able to recover. It's a small motion to this side. So I'm beginning my attack and he thinks I'm going here, but then I go back with a cut number 2. So outside guard, I feint a cut 1, but actually make a cut number 2 around his sword. I've defended myself, I've deceived him, and I can get out safely. Anytime an opponent has a tendency to parry, feint them. Outside guard, feint, cut 2. Outside guard, feint, 2. The same thing can be done from the inside guard. From the inside guard, what I'm going to do here is feint a cut number 2 and then come back and cut number 1 at his head. Okay? Inside guard, feint 2, cut 1. Just like that. The key here in all of these is to make sure I move my sword before my body. So if you notice this, if I end up starting to feint and I lunge as I do that, he's just going to stab me in the face, right? I will impale myself on his sword. So what I want to do first is make sure I have either control over his weapon or have deceived it in some way, and then only at the very end do I move my body forward into danger. All right, so a blade action is another way of controlling my opponent's sword. What I can do is hit it, slide on it, send it flying in some way. The basic one I'm going to show you is called a beat, okay? So what I do is from the outside guard, all I'm going to do is retract my blade back a little bit and hit his. And the key is to do it with the weak of my sword on the weak of his. Should give me just enough of an opening. It doesn't have to be too hard, just enough of an opening to cut home safely before he can recover. And then his body and sword are kind of disordered. They're not in a position to hit me. So what I'm going to do here is retract and immediately cut home in his face. So I'm making a cut number 2 on his sword, and I come back across with a cut number 1, hitting him in the face. Show a couple of these. So the same thing can be done from the inside guard. What I'm going to do is hit his blade with a cut number 1, and now cut across with a cut number 2. Okay, again on the lunge, beat his sword out of the way, then come in with the cut. A couple of those. So this next blade action is a really fancy one. Crowds tend to like it because it makes a nice sliding sound on the blade. And if you want to impress people, this is the one you want to do. It's called a whirl. So from an inside guard, Wyatt is going to extend his sword at me almost horizontal. What I'm going to do is slide my sword so I have the strong on his weak, and I'm just going to switch it around into a hanging guard position. Kind of sends his sword flying out of the way. So I extend it flying, and I can cut him back across the face, across the chest, or anywhere that I have an opening. Sometimes this even disarms the sword and sends it flying. Be careful if you're doing that in front of an audience, but it is pretty cool. So a couple more times. So one aspect that's different from modern fencing is that grappling and disarms are allowed and permitted in Highland broadsword fencing and all earlier fencing. So when you do that is when you end up a little too close to your opponent than is comfortable to make an attack from. And at that point you usually push forward farther and grab their sword. And this can either result in a position where the opponent's sword is locked or you take it away from them completely. The first one I'm going to show you is just where I lock my opponent and pull his sword under my arm. So we're going to begin in an outside guard. Wyatt is going to attack me to the inside, which I defend on a hanging guard as I lunge forward. And now you can see I'm at a very close range where if I take my sword away and hit him, I might get hit too. It might not be safe. So what I'm going to do instead is grab the top of his wrist. I'm going to chicken wing it in my arm and pinch it to my side. So he can't really hurt me in this position. He might move his sword a little bit back and forth, but through my jacket, through my clothing, it's not going to cut me. And then I'm free to hit him on the head. Okay, so one more time from an outside guard. He attacks inside. Again. And if I want to, at this point, a variation of it is I can grab his sword by the strong. If I point his sword towards him and pull it, I can just rip it right out of his hand. Okay, so I'll do that again. I'll go gentle with him because it can sometimes trap the fingers. And strike him on the head. Or the tradition in the Highlands is to let your opponent go. So either you would wound them on the arm, disarm them in some way, but try to spare their life in a duel situation. On the battlefield, it's a little bit different though.